All right, gang, so let's talk today about economic unions. The last couple of days in class, we have talked about natural resources, levels of economic development, and things that have encouraged world trade. And yesterday, we talked about Bert and Betsy and the story of Bert and Betsy. And we talked about how Bert and Betsy had advantages over each other and even talked about lowering tariffs, okay? Well, one of the ways that countries lower tariffs is through joining economic unions. So we're going to spend this lesson, this shorter lesson, talking about economic unions. So hopefully this will only take a few minutes. The definition of an economic union is a community of countries or nations that join together to promote their similar interests. Often they're used, although not always, to create free trade zones where no tariffs or taxes on imports limit trade, and sometimes they even have a common currency. What this means is that you can go from one country to another and use the same money. It's very similar to the United States. Economic unions may also be among countries that produce a similar product like petroleum. So what we're going to do is today we're going to give you several examples, or I'm going to give you several examples of economic unions, and we're going to talk about the good things and the bad things about entering into economic unions. And there's a lot of controversy about them, and so we'll talk about some of those issues. So in your notes, I want you to write down, fill in the notes as we go along, and then I also want you to map them and locate these economic unions geographically. The first economic union, and largely the most powerful and strongest economic union, is called the European Union. The European Union is made up of most European countries, although certainly not all. You see on the map there that Switzerland is not part of the European Union. It was founded in 1993, but it's got its roots way back in 1951 and 1957. In 1951 and 1957, there was something called the European Coal and Steel Community that was joined together to limit or lower tariffs on coal and steel traded between countries. And what they realized was, especially with the lead of Germany and France, what they realized was that a stronger Europe included a strong tariff-free zone for coal and steel. And France and Germany were the ones to kind of take the bull by the horns and lead there. Okay, it was formed to reduce trade barriers. And it also promotes a lot of cooperation amongst its member nations. Last but not least, they use the euro as a common currency. Now, the European Union goes even further than being an economic union. And you could argue that the European Union is actually a country in and of itself, more similar to the United States. When we were talking about forms of government, you could actually also argue that the European Union is more like a confederacy, where you have these group of countries that get together and they deal with similar issues, but they are united under certain issues. And that's kind of what the European Union does. Okay? The second economic union that's really important to us is NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement. The North American Free Trade Agreement is made up of the countries of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. All make up members of NAFTA, hence North America. It's all three countries in North America. It was founded in 1994, and it also was designed to reduce trade barriers. There are no tariffs or limited tariffs and taxes on imports between the three countries, and goods and sometimes even workers can move freely between the three nations. The next economic union is ASEAN, or ASEAN. We've talked about this before. It's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these because, like I said, we've talked about most or all of these before. It's made up of most of the countries in Southeast Asia. It was founded in 1967, like every other economic union, to promote similar economic interests and to reduce trade barriers. What it does is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, many of the countries in Southeast Asia here are major textile import or exporters. Lots of fabric, lots of cloth. Those of you that keep track of the modeling world or the fashion world know that many models go to Southeast Asia to model. There are many fashion shows there, and that's because they are a major fashion area, a major textile area. Okay? The last economic union that we'll talk about is OPEC, and you can see the OPEC countries right here. It's made up of most countries in the Middle East, or many countries in the Middle East. You've got Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, okay, the UAE, and are right there as well. You also have here Algeria and Libya. Actually, it's vice versa. Algeria and Libya. And you also have Nigeria, and that's Gabon, Venezuela, and this tiny country, which unfortunately Ecuador, I believe, are also part of it. Yeah, that's Ecuador. So those are all members of the OPEC. OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Okay, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and you can see the countries there. Oh, hopefully it'll go back. Oh, it didn't. Okay, but anyway, it was founded in 1961. You can see it down there at the bottom in 1961. And basically, they try to control the sale and the price of petroleum throughout the world. They try to control the sale and price of petroleum throughout the world. So now, in recent years, they've seen a decline in their influence on the price and sale of petroleum, and that's mostly because the U.S. has had a boom in petroleum production, and so their influence has become decreasing. So what are some disadvantages and some advantages of economic unions? First advantage of an economic union is that member countries typically become more industrialized. That means build more factories. And that's because they're cooperating with other countries. They have access and can share technology amongst the countries. Mexico has been able to develop more factories because of its relationship and close proximity to the United States. And that's been a good thing for Mexico. The disadvantage is that some industries close because of the result of economic unions. And this hurts the workers of a country. Going along with the example of the U.S. and Mexico, many U.S. factories, automobile factories, for example, have shut down because some of the manufacturing plants or assembly plants have moved to Mexico. Okay, another advantage is that nations have larger access or access to larger markets. That basically means more places to sell their stuff. And because now they are working with countries on a global scale, on the global marketplace, they have more people on their side. They have more places to sell their stuff. The negative to this is that economic unions can result in the concentration of some industries in certain countries, while other countries are excluded. An example of that is the textile industry. The textile industry is largely centered in Southeast Asia and even some in Central America because of economic unions and cheap labor. And so those are some reasons or some negatives to that. Another positive, that members have access to human, natural, and capital resources of other countries without restriction. The European Union is the best example of this. Goods, products, and people move freely in most of the countries in Europe that are members of the European Union. It doesn't cost anything. You can go from one to the other, and it's really like in the United States, traveling from state to state. Negative to that, the negative side to this, is that large agricultural companies, also known as agribusiness, have taken over family farms. So big agricultural companies, Monsanto, ADM, are big companies that grow food all over the world, and there are these big giant corporations that are in charge of farms. Purdue, to a certain extent, is an agribusiness, and they control farms throughout the country in the United States. And those big businesses take over small family-run farms. This often leaves family farmers unemployed. Family farmers either have to adopt the agribusiness model or they become unemployed. And both of those are unfortunate often for the family farmers because it does often mean less pay for them. More positives for economic unions is member nations have greater influence on the world market because they've got more guys on their side. Okay, the easiest way to think about this is they have teammates. They now can negotiate prices on an international level because they have the sway. Mexico, for example, has the sway of the United States behind them, and so that benefits them greatly on the global market. Okay. Negative to this is while they do have support of each other, sometimes countries can disagree on certain policies. OPEC is an excellent example of this. Saudi Arabia and Iran currently are kind of fighting and arguing against each other, and often this plays out in Saudi Arabia trying to change the price or control the price of oil more than Iran does. And so that can lead to some disagreements or some arguments. Okay. Tomorrow we're going to talk more about the global economy in the next lesson about the global economy, and that'll be in the next page in your notes, and we'll address that later. But today's lesson was all about economic unions. Take a look at the ones that we listed and the advantages and the disadvantages for them. Have a great day. Bye-bye.